Hey everybody, welcome back to K-12 Analytics Engineering. I am Marcos L. Kozer, and today we're going to do part 2 of the NWEA MAP series. So in part 1, we talked about how to extract and load map data from NWEA to Google Cloud Storage on a nightly recurring basis. That work involved a Google Cloud function that's triggered every single night to automatically refresh that data in Google Cloud Storage. Now we need to get that data into Google BigQuery. Let's jump over and let's look at how to do that using external tables, pulling in that nightly refresh data and historical data. Here we are back in the GitHub repo that we were looking at in part 1. We followed the code down below to deploy the Google Cloud function that runs every single night to send refreshed NWEA map assessment results to Google Cloud Storage. So if I jump over here, I have my Google Cloud Storage bucket. I have my assessment results CSV. This is the file that the Cloud function is recreating every single night as it fetches new data from MAP. You'll also see I have a second file here. You can run the data export scheduler manually, and you can download prior term assessment data. And so here I have my current term and I have a prior term as well, because I'm going to show you that you can actually have many files in here and load them all in at once. So now let's jump into Google BigQuery, and I want to create a data set for this. So I'm going to go ahead and say create data set, and I'll call it raw NWEA map. I'll go ahead and create that. Now that we have our data set created, we are going to create table, and I will create the table from Google Cloud Storage. I'll go ahead and select one of my CSV files. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an asterisk before assessment results, and that's a wildcard. So what Google BigQuery is going to do is when it goes to select the files for this table, it's actually going to select every file that ends in assessment results.csv, and so in this case it's going to pick up 2 for me. I will set a table name here of just assessment results, and I'm going to change the table type from native table to external. So native is the default, and what that does is it imports the CSV data into BigQuery. But every single day during an active testing term, that data is changing, and we don't want to have to re-import it every single time. So external table is going to create a table where when we query it, it's actually querying the CSV files themselves that are sitting in Google Cloud Storage. So we'll leave that to external, and we'll jump down to schema and say edit as text. Here we want to paste in the schema that you'll find in the NWEA map repo under schemas assessment results.json. So I'll go ahead and copy the contents of that and paste that into BigQuery here. You'll notice that all of the types are string. We're going to cast them appropriately in the next step. So I'll scroll down, go under advanced options, and I'll skip the header rows that are at the top of every CSV file, and I'll say create table. We get this go to table here, so I click on that, and I see my assessment results table. Here's the schema that I showed you, and we'll see under details the source URI is that asterisk, that wildcard. And so I can query this here, and I can actually see the data. So select everything, I'll go ahead and run this, and I'll see the sample data that I have in this CSV file right here. And so this data doesn't live in BigQuery right now, but BigQuery is querying the CSV files and bringing them in here. We now have this external table created in BigQuery, but what we want to do is we want to take that data and we want to transform it and reshape it for our specific analytical need or our specific report. And so if you remember from previous videos, we use dbt to track all SQL transformation work that we do on top of our raw data. So if I go over here to dbt cloud, I need to go into my sources file and add a few lines here that tells dbt, hey, this table exists in my BigQuery and I'm going to reference it later in queries. And so here I say my name, raw NWEA map, that's the data set, and then I've got my assessment results table. Now I'll go under models, marts. I've created an NWEA map folder and an assessment results model here. And so what this is at the top, I have dbt set to materialize the result of this query as a table in BigQuery and to put it under a schema or a data set called staging. And then I have a bunch of SQL. So I am selecting from that raw NWEA map assessment results external table, and I'm selecting only the specific columns that I know that I use in my reporting. And then for each one, I'm doing two things really. One is I'm aliasing them to different names that maybe match what I'm using in other places. So for example, I don't say student ID in my other models, I say student key because that's what I see from the EdFi Analytics middle tier, and I like to use those column names. So I alias that here, and then I also split here the term name and to grab just the first value up to the space, and I call that term. I'll show you that when I when I run this preview. And then I'm doing a few other things. Casting is the big one that I talked about. So test percentile, test RIT score, these were all brought in as strings, but here I'm casting them as ints and floats where needed. So I'll go ahead and query this. So I'll run this query. And so now we see really what's going to be the kind of foundational data model that I use for all of the downstream analytics work here. And so I've got my aliased columns. You see what I did with term name. So I have term name here, but then I created a new term column that will show just fall and it will not show the year. And then I have my other columns and I've casted where necessary. I can also see an actual visual representation of what I've done. So I have my raw NWEA map data here, and then that turns into this assessment results data model. And then part 3 is going to show you this reporting table on the right, NWEA map. That's the thing that I actually plug into Google Data Studio. So let's actually run this model too, and I'll show you it in BigQuery. So down here I can say dbt run models, and I can say assessment results, and it's going to fill that in for me. So I'll go ahead and do that and run. That's succeeded. I have this green check mark, so now I can go back to BigQuery and refresh this. And we now see under dbt ml cozer, because I'm in my dev environment here, under staging, I have a new assessment results table, and this is a native table. This is actually stored in BigQuery. It has just the columns that you saw in my SQL. It has 1,100 rows. It's not an external table. This is a native table, and I can preview the data here. And so this is the table that I'll use for the downstream reporting tables, not that raw one that we looked at first. So that's it. Please make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. Future videos will go into custom visualizations in Data Studio using NWEA map data.